Okay, let's talk China. Problem number one, China's good. It's a short version. China in 10 years will not exist as a functional nation, assuming it's a country at all. This is the Chinese demography back in 1950. This is right after World War II. They had a little baby bust as soon as the Japanese were no longer occupying. I'd celebrate too. You fast forward, however, to 1980, and Mao and his folks were thinking that there were just too many children because that boom had exploded. And this is the China that I think most of us still think of. The China that just has an endless, bottomless population of young people who can make anything for pennies on the dollar. But that's not accurate because the Chinese put in place the one-child policy. And if you fast forward to the 2000, you can see it took a huge bite out of their demography. Now, China at this time, in the year 2000, was kind of in this magic moment for a few years because the people who were born before one child were now in their 20s. So there's that bottomless labor. They didn't have very many kids, which meant that all the money that they normally would have been spending on diapers and homes, they could spend on pizzas and convertibles. So China had rapidly growing economic activity, rapid urbanization. They urbanized at 7 times the pace that we did. They crammed 200 years of economic development into 40, which sounds really impressive until you realize that you can only do that once. And at the same time, they spent all their money on high impact consumption. No offense to those of you who are parents, but the velocity of capital that comes from going on vacation is higher than what you get from buying diapers because it involves more people. It pushes it further. But again, you can only do that once. Here's China today. China, as of January 1st of this year, was the fastest aging society in human history. They're already past the point of no return for demographic recovery. And then we found out about 6 weeks ago that the Chinese, by China's own admission, had gotten the data wrong. Their birth rate has dropped by more than half in the last 5 years. And that's before you consider some of the genocidal policies they're doing in places like Zeihan, where they're now party loyalists physically, permanently installed into each home to make sure that the husband and the wife cannot sleep in the same bed so they can't have kids. In Zhejiang, the birth rate's dropped by like 3/4 in just 2 years. We don't have a full counting of the data because it's Chinese data, but every aspect of it looks horrific by any definition. And this is now the best case scenario, because if you fast forward just to 2030, China in less than 15 years is going to have a greater proportion of retirees than any country in the world, including Japan. Done. We're just watching them die at this point. And what do you know about politics when the old people are the ones calling all the shots? It gets brittle, it gets loud, it gets judgy, and it doesn't care at all about the facts. That's wolf warrior diplomacy. This is what a country looks like when it's going out of history. You see it in some of the numbers. There's average wages in a number of countries in Southeast Asia that I'm broadly positive on. Here are the Mexicans right in the middle, hyper competitive. And here's the PRC. Labor costs have increased by about a factor of 12 in 20 years. The fastest labor inflation we've ever seen on this planet. China is no longer the low-cost producer, and they haven't moved up the value-added scale to become the high-cost producer. 12-fold increase in labor, but their labor scale has probably only roughly doubled their productivity in 20 years. Their peak was probably around 2004 to 2006. Since then, they've been getting less efficient. And now we're in a situation where their labor pool will shrink substantially every year until the end. The strategic picture is much worse. The deep russet, those are densely populated areas. You'll notice, laser up here? I do not. You'll notice that up in northern China, north of Shanghai, that's where the bulk of the population is. That big russet blob up here, that's 70% of the Chinese population. Look at how they interact with the world. Their only way to push out to the ocean is to go between Japan and Taiwan. Does all their talk of reunification make a little bit more sense now? China is not a consumption-led system. They have to export. They have to access the wider world. And to do that, they have to sail between the two countries that are most pathologically opposed to them. The only way that China has ever been able to interact economically with the wider world is under the American-led globalized order, because we put everybody in this part of the world on the same side. All the Americans have to do, if the goal really is to destroy China, is go home. Geography will take care of the rest. The lights will probably go out first. The green bars over here are where the oil comes from. The red bars over here are where the oil goes to. They're a convenient 6,000 miles apart. So for China to import oil, 80% of its oil need, it has to sail by Vietnam, who hates them, by Indonesia and Malaysia, who hate them, by Singapore, which has an aircraft carrier berth designed for American and Japanese carriers, by India, who really hates them, and then it can get to the Persian Gulf and it can have all kinds of fun in the Middle East, just like we did. Remember, the Chinese have one aircraft carrier It's a clone of a Soviet carrier that was designed in the 60s. That's it. Now, the Shandong, their carrier, we have 10 that are the same size. And in addition to our 10 carrying twice as many fighter craft, they also have 3,000 Marines on board, so 10 to 1. And those aren't what we call carriers. Those are what we call our amphibious assault unit. We then have super carriers, 12 of them, that have 7 times the combat capability of the Shandong. So in just the aircraft carriers, you're talking here like a 40 to 1 ratio. And we don't have to sail by any enemies to go wherever we want in the world. We're blue water capable. They are not. In fact, the Shandong is such a piece of crap that it cannot sail more than 500 miles from shore, and it needs fighter cover from the ground onshore in order to survive in any sort of conflict. There's no contest here. The Japanese, by the way, can probably outshoot them on the deep blue sea by about a factor of 25 to 1. It's not just us. Let's talk trade. Now, the guy on the left, this is Robert Lighthizer. Under Donald Trump, he was our trade representative. It was his job to initiate, negotiate, and enforce every trade deal on the books. And he has a reputation, which I think he would be proud of being a complete hard ass. He doesn't negotiate. He gets political cover from his boss. That's the only way he takes the job. He did this under Reagan too. He lays out the American position, and it's a take it or leave it. And it was this attitude that got the trade deals with Korea and Japan and Mexico and Canada. He started deals with the United Kingdom, but when he laid out the deals for the US and the UK, they went paler than normal and went home because the entire Brexit program has not worked out the way that they thought it was going to. They'll be back, but he wasn't able to finish that one up. His replacement is this woman. This is Catherine Tai, and she has never participated in international negotiation at all, nor led a negotiation even in the United States. So from the point of view of initiating and negotiating trade deals, she's widely unqualified for the job. But that tells me everything I need to know about the Biden team's trade policy. There isn't one. It's not a priority. Mexico and Canada are 2 of our top 3 trading partners. Japan's number 4, Korea's number 6. The hard work's done. Her job is enforcement, and for that, she's freaking perfect. She's a trade lawyer. She sues countries that violate U.S. trade law, whether it's internationalized or not. She's suing Mexico and Canada right now because Mexico and Canada thought that now that Trump was gone, they can kind of go back on what they were forced into. No. And so we've got these fun things going on in trade policy with Tai because, she's a Democrat. So environmental and labor regulations, female rights, all that, it's being folded into trade policy for the first time. And she's already sued China 7 times this year. It's getting kind of interesting. She's applying these new values retroactively to the phase 1 trade deal. That's fun. There's a few things going on supporting this kind of echelon approach to trade. So you guys may remember that Donald Trump on his last day in office had 2 big policy changes versus the Chinese. First, he said what was going on in Xinjiang was a genocide because, it is. And second, he said that any American diplomat or military officer or bureaucrat can travel to Taiwan at any time in their official capacity as a representative of the U.S. government without having to first get special dispensation from the White House, which is about that far from formal recognition of Taiwan as an independent country, because it is an independent country. On Joe Biden's first day in office, he put his stamp of approval on both policies and made it bipartisan. Like one of the few things we agree on. In his first week on the job, he sent 2 aircraft carrier battle groups, one of the big ones and one of the ones with the Marines in it, to go practice amphibious assaults in the South China Sea. That was fun. They did it within sight of some of the Chinese military facility. Within sight, that's like 4 miles. Catherine Tai, her family, they're from Taiwan. The Chinese perceive this as a full court press against their interests, and they're not wrong. Donald Trump had America first. Joe Biden has Buy American. They're not that different. One of the fun things about Donald Trump is he'd come up with his policy on China. He'd bring in the bureaucrats who would be responsible for implementing it. He'd lay out what he wanted to do, and when they were on their way out the door, he'd fire them. Joe Biden does the same thing, but at the end, he gives them a raise. So basically what we're getting is the rhetoric of Donald Trump actually operationalized into trade policy now. So whether you love Trump or hate Trump, he did break the bubble around globalization and trade. And Biden's just ramming it home. Different stationery, same policy. And it's going to get really fun real soon. There's any number of reasons that the relationship is in bad shape right now. But the debate within the White House right now is what level of boycott are we going to do in February for the Beijing Games? If we have a boycott, a full boycott, like a Soviet-style boycott, and the athletes don't go, the Chinese will feel that they have no choice but to react. Because the American corporate sponsors in that environment have to pull their sponsorship. So, Nike, Airbnb, United, the big guys. If they do that, Beijing will confiscate every asset they have in the mainland. And any American company that is still operating in the mainland will then be targeted by their competitors as sponsors of the genocide games. An easy PR play. And that's the end of the relationship. That could very well happen this year. The European Parliament today voted almost unanimously to support a full boycott. Fun times.